Hi, I'm Lauren Selden, and today we are going to make a sterling silver ring using the overlay soldering technique. So I have a couple of tools that I need out right away, and I just wanted to share what those are. One, it is this chart for determining the ring blank lengths, and I got this from Jewelry Concepts and Technology from Opiontract. And this is like the ultimate Bible for metalworking and jewelry. So this is page 735 of this book. And you can find these online too. It'll have the sizes in US, the length in millimeters, not considering the thickness of material. And then it has a chart where it goes from 12 gauge, 14 gauge, 16 gauge, and it works its way up. So the two types of rings that I'm going to show, one is where you have a layer that you pierce into, and then it creates this pattern, and so that's two layers of metal together. And this one is the same idea, two layers of metal that have a really different profile than just a straight rectangle, and then the piercing is in the middle here. So this is Michelle Obama given Nux. And so then the background is liver of sulfur in order to darken it so that you can see it really well. So those are the types of rings that we're going to make. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to have some material. I've already cut this material, but in the case of you getting started out, you're just going to have some sheet metal, and you're going to want to cut it down really sparingly based on your measurements. So I need some sterling silver, so there's my sheet. And I also need some ring sizers, and these could be plastic or metal. And I need to decide which finger I'm going to create a ring for, and then figure out what size that is. So mine is coming in as a size 6. You'll see a 5 dash and then a 5, so the 5 dash is 5.5. So a 6 works well, and you just want it to kind of go on and go off without being too tight. You could certainly make a 5 3/4, and you can make those in between sizes. So I have my ring sizer, and then the other thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to take my two thicknesses of material. So in this case, it's started out being 18 gauge sterling silver, and so I'm going to take the two pieces together, put those in the gauge plate when they're tight, and that's going to make 12 gauge. So I'm going to look at my chart for 12 gauge. I'm going to go down to my size 6, and it says 58.1. So I'm going to use my metric ruler. And I'm going to go 10 is the 1 centimeter, so 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. 55, 56, 57, 58, 58.1. I'll just keep it on 58 because I can stretch it a little bit. So I need to cut that portion of it off. So I could do this with a shear, or I could do this with a jeweler's saw. I'm going to go ahead and use a shear. So you want to save every little piece of this sterling silver wire so that you can melt it down again later and make new sheet. So the layer that I measured is going to be what's going to be the top layer, and so it needs to be perfectly measured to 58.1 millimeters from my chart. So again, I did the thickness of the material, that's 12 gauge, looked at the chart, went down to 12 gauge to my size 6, and I found my measurement. Last little thing that I like to do is I like to file and try to do no harm here, but we want to keep that, we want to see this being straight across, and I can do that to both sides. Okay, so both of these metals have been under quite a bit of tension, so the next step is going to be to anneal, and I want just a little bit of the edge hanging over each side, so you can see that my ends have just a little bit of material hanging over each side. The accurate one is the top one. Okay, so let's go over and anneal. So next step is to anneal to make sure that the metal is ready to be soldered and ready to be formed eventually. So I'm going to do a light flame. You can see the color start to change. So there it is where it's all black. And there it is where it's annealed. And you can see the color change on the torch. There's just a little bit of orange flame that comes off. So there's like a yellowish rainbow color. All of it's black. And then there's my light orange on the tip of the flame. So both of those are annealed. I need to drop those into the pickle. This is water just to quench. Drop them into the pickle to let them clean. So here's a little tip. What I like to do, I just got these works out of the pickle, quenched them in baking soda and water, and then I've used pumice. So I have the top one and the bottom one. So I'm going to save the bottom one for later. And the first step that I'm going to do before doing any design is I am going to flood solder on the back of this work. And in a second, this will make a lot of sense as to why I'm doing this. But this is my best tip for doing overlay. So I'm just putting paste flux on it, and I have a cotter pin that has carbon on it, and that's going to keep it up off of the brick. It's going to allow the heat to really flow around the piece. So then I'm going to pop some solder down here. These are pallions of solder, and I do want to spread them out. And you still do want to use little bitty pallions, little bitty chips of hard solder. So we're starting off with hard solder. Hard solder is going to melt at 1425 degrees, and so we want that to be the first solder that we're using. I want enough solder to fill kind of all the negative space. And I have it up on the cotter pin. Heat moving. So I can preheat so that that solder doesn't go dancing around. You can see that the flux is already changing colors. As I'm preheating, that brick is heating up the metal enough that then the water in the flux is boiling off. And then don't scribble. Go nice and easy all the way over the piece. And then I do like a little welder circle so that I can kind of spread it out. And there it is. So all I have done is I've just spread pools of solder out on the bottom of the top piece. Quench that in some water. Try to avoid quenching it right away because you don't want to shatter the solder. And then I'm going to pop it in the pickle. So we've already annealed this piece of sterling silver metal that is going to be on the bottom sheet, and we took the top piece and flipped it over and we flooded solder all the way across what is now the bottom of the top piece. And one thing that I like to do is go over to a sanding board or to some sandpaper and just kind of barely put pressure. The solder is face down on the sandpaper. Put a little bit of pressure on the material, and then you should see the sandpaper kind of go across the whole surface. So everything is the same height. That'll make that flow a little bit better. Okay, so I said this is my tip because now I can draw my design on here. I can drill all the holes and I can pierce everything out, and the solder is already flown here. So that is going to prevent solder from flowing into my intricate design. So that's the best tip that I have. So solder's on the other side, and now I need to do my pattern, and we'll solder it after my pattern's done. So I have my two pieces of material. This one is pierced, and the solder is on the back, and then this one has been annealed. So I'm going to flood this bottom sheet with some flux. Put the top sheet on. And then I usually like to start from the center and barely kind of squeeze them together, making just like a baby happy face. So, not a super happy face, but just kind of slightly satisfied face like this. So I like to have that ready. I said I was going to start on the brick, but I'm going to start up here. It's easier to transfer. I'll get my pallions of solder, pop them right on the edges. So again, I'm setting them on top and then rolling them down. So you'll notice that I flipped the tripod upside down, and then I have the screen up on top. And that's so that that big circular disc doesn't act as a heat sink. So there's my piece right there. And let's go ahead and solder this. So again, I'm going to use a number 2 tip so that I've got enough heat. I'm going to keep my brick close just in case if I need to pull it down and get more heat. And I'll start to preheat. I like to have copper tongs nearby. So I'm preheating by just heating underneath the piece, getting it nice and hot, and that metal is still sitting really nice and flat. I'll heat the top of the piece. So with capillary action and gravity, I'm going to suck the heat towards, I'm going to suck the solder towards the heat. So it's on the underneath side of the top piece. So I'm heating underneath. And I can see that that solder all flowed. I like to kind of box off the edges just to make sure that that solder flowed all the way around. Go right over the top one more time. And that looks great. I'm going to take it off of the steel just so that it doesn't stick. And I'm going to put it on the brick for a second, and then I'll quench. Try not to quench right away so that you don't create a fracture. Okay, so we have the work soldered together. It's really gotten nice and hot. I can't see any pits or any lines. If I saw any, I would go back and I would solder those little pits. Everything looks really good. So the inside measurement, the top, was my real measurement. So I'm going to take my saw and I'm going to cut to that line, and then I'm going to file those ends. So that's my next step. Remember, the top measurement was our measurement from our chart. So I'm just using that line as a starting point, cutting off the excess metal. And I'm still going to save this for later so that I could pour some silver ingot. That one went over my shoulder, but I swear I'll pick it up. And this is the best way to kind of know if this part is soldered. I'm going to go ahead and file until I have a straight line to that front piece. And I should see no gaps No little pits. It should just look like one solid piece of sterling silver, which that one does. The trouble that you're gonna have with this step is that if you don't file it parallel, you'll probably have to recut your ring once you've formed it. So I usually like to pull back towards me and get this nice and straight so this file works on the push, so then if you lay it straight down, then it works on the pull as well. And try not to tip it one way or the other so that you just get a really straight, flat plane. And this is looking great. I really do investigate the edges a lot just to make sure that I don't need to resolder. I'd rather resolder while it's flat, and I would probably do this on the brick and the cotter pin instead of up on the tripod if I end up having to resolder anything. This looks good. So the next thing is going to be, I have both of these edges really straight, and the next thing is going to be to bend this into a ring form, and I'm going to do it with a ring bender, but you can use a mandrel and a rawhide hammer as well. But I'm going to show you the ring bender. So I have an entire video on the Superior ring bending tool, so you could look that up and it'll show all the setup. The main thing I'm doing is I'm starting with a ring size that is smaller than the ring size that I want, and I've placed the plastic part, whoops, I've placed the plastic part on that side. So I have my piercing going towards the plastic, and then I'm just gonna start. So I changed to a size 18. Be really careful if you end up having to change, try to double check your sizes beforehand, because this ring could still easily get a fracture, especially with my really small piercings. So you see that I'm just going a little bit at a time, and this is just like whenever we're using a hammer and we have overlapping blows. So think of it the same way. Okay, so I have little bitty taps. I've got to make sure that I check my design, because if I have any spots that are like a little bit weak in that writing, it could still break. So I'm just hitting just slightly on the side, and then whenever it goes and it pops into itself, that's great. You just hear that little pop back. And then I'm going to cut this one back open, just because the way that it was filed, and then I'll be able to solder that seam. So let's cut this back open. So the cutting part is pretty typical, because that's a really great way to just make sure that the piece is perfect. So I'm going to put it in my ring clamp, and I'm just going to try to cut just the kerf of the blade through so that those line up perfectly. Take your time, let the blade do the work. So there, it just popped through. And mine just popped together through tension. You might have to barely hit it with a hammer one more time. So I'm ready to go ahead and solder this. So last time we used hard solder, which melts at 1425 degrees. This time I'm going to use medium solder, which melts at 1390, meaning that the hard will stay and then the medium will be able to melt. So I just have little pallions of solder. And I'm going to put them on the joint all the way across. We'll leave this one sit here just in case I need to pick it up with heat. I do want gravity to help me, so I want to get this as level as I can. Okay. So I'm still using a number 2 tip. I'm heating the whole piece. So really making sure that the bottom gets nice and hot. Heating over the top. I want it to be the exact same temperature so that that solder flows. And there it went through. And I usually like to knock it down. Pull it back through one more time. And that looks great. So our final steps before cleanup are that we're looking at all the edges and seeing if there's anything, any gaps or any areas to be worried about. I have this area beneath my letters that I'll probably want to go back and fix, but I'm going to form it just a little bit so that I make sure that it's all nice and flat. So I'm going to use a ring mandrel. This one's a ring mandrel. It has actual ring sizes all the way down it. Use the one that's a full mandrel on all sides. And then I'm going to use a rawhide mallet that doesn't have any lead in it, so there's no weight, so it's really light. Anytime that I'm getting started, I'm going to try to get the ring on there as much as I can. I don't want to hit a big negative space. I want to hit it really close to where it's on the edge of the mandrel so that I don't accidentally crack my ring. So I just work a little bit at a time until I turn that oval into more of a circle. And once I'm getting it close to a circle, I'm going to start doing what I call overlapping blows. And it is a tapered mandrel, so I need to take it off. You can backhammer a little bit to get that size back to where you want it. And then overlapping blows. So I have my soldered ring, and the next step is going to be a lot of cleanup. So one of the things that I do is use a cross-cut file, and I'm going to clean up that whole edge. That's why we left that edge really, really small, so that we wouldn't have a ton of filing. If you've already cleaned your desk, this is a good time to save your sterling silver filings. It's going both ways there. It really only works on the pole in this case. Try not to dull your file. Sometimes you get excited. If you have a mini belt sander, you could also belt sand that edge. Just be really careful. It does get hot, and the belt sander, depending on how many RPMs it has, it will chew that material up pretty fast. So hand doing this, even though it seems like it's going to take a second, it's not. It's kind of the safest way to make sure you don't mess up your piece. Then I often use a single cut file to file the entire top. Now I use 18 gauge metal. I want to get rid of any of the solder because it will stay apparent no matter what. So I want to make sure that I'm really filing, and you see that I'm doing a file really on the push. I want to do no harm. I want to make sure that I'm going all the way across the ring. If I use 2 pieces of 18 gauge metal, which is making 12 gauge, once I have given myself room to file and all of that, it's going to thin that ring a little bit and make it even more comfortable. So I'm definitely slowing down on the joint, and I do like to switch directions of my ring just in case if I was accidentally pushing a little bit harder or letting off or whatever. I just want it to be as even as I can. The other benefit about filing the entire surface is that if you had fire stain or fire scale, which is whenever the copper starts to come to the surface whenever it was exposed to fire or oxygen, and you get like this purplish little tint all over your metal. So you can keep that down by having a coating of flux on there, or there's a bunch of other ways to do that. But also giving it a good filing all the way through is going to also help that. And then I would take my half round jeweler's file, and I'm going to file the entire inside. Flip the ring. Everything else is going to be using flex shaft attachments, patinating the ring so that that pierced part really pops out. Kind of all the finishing things that we already know how to do. So I still have a ways to go on the side edge. If I want to make a comfort fit, I would use the half round of my file. We can kind of talk about that at another time. But there we are. So I've got my ring all the way on its way, got some cleanup, and then that band on band ring is finished. Thanks for watching. So here's our finished ring. I was able to file and sand the entire ring, sand the inside, liver of sulfur, and take away the patina, and then shine it up in the tumbler. You can see me in the reflection there. Thanks for watching.